trying to use the protest potential of a population because they know that democracies are open, you have freedom of expression, freedom of speech. So if you get the own population to protest against the government, then you can persuade them, you can force them to change course. And this is very much part of weakening the West. This is part of the strategy to get people to either give up on the process of democracy so that they don't vote anymore and everything. And like you said, they will have people in Sweden, where I live. A couple of years ago, you had this person who's working here on behalf of the Russian government. He's a spy, basically. They found out about him. So he was writing articles about immigration with fake names. One pro-immigration, one anti-immigration. And then he was arguing with himself to make it more inflammatory. And this is part of this is what they do. And it's very bad. But what I think lacks is a kind of response. You have to treat where it comes from with different, like you have to change your rhetoric, obviously. But I think that when it comes from the right, the isolationists, right, I think that they seem to think that it's some kind of, America can just isolate itself and maintain its economy and everything. It seems to not understand that it relies on its allies. That what has made America great isn't just America itself, it's also the allies it has. Because the reason why people want to move to Western countries is precisely because they are very good, but it's safety, it's economy, all of this, and this is something that other Western countries also contribute to, and I think that this is something that isn't really articulated, and I think that's really bad. When it comes to the other side, it's a little bit more tricky but yeah, I think that there needs to be a much better response, and isolationists actually do occur on both sides of the political spectrum, but yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that can be done when it comes to responding to these things, and I don't really see it. It's rare for me to see someone actually address these points in a way that, because you don't have, you can point to facts here. It's a fact that America wouldn't be the same country without its allies. So anyone who thinks that you can just isolate yourself from the rest of the world, you're completely wrong. And that these are the kinds of things that I think should be articulated. But anyways.
Tam, I saw it up close and personal in the 1960s, covering the Vietnam War protests. And I will tell you, I was not a supporter of the war in Vietnam. That being said, we were in a war in Vietnam, and one of the reasons we lost that war was because they lost the support of the public, and a good portion of the reason that they lost the support of the public is because Russia and China, and I'm sure others, were infiltrating the anti-war movement and causing all kinds of havoc and getting people out on the street. I know the people who were involved in organizing, some of the people involved in organizing in that movement. So I know who they are, and some of them I see today out there on the Free Palestine movement and other issues that are legitimate issues. People have the right to go out and protest, etc., etc. But where are they getting funded? The first protests after the attack on Israel, before Israel fired one round in response, was in Times Square on October the 8th, protesting Israel with signs that had been printed long before the October 7th invasion. Well, how did they know about the October 7th invasion? It's insidious, reason, even when the facts are before us, we have a difficult time wrapping our mind around it. There's such a thing as doing the right thing no matter what. I think that was Dominic's point. He was a little more emotive about it, saying some things are worth dying for. But it's down to what is the right thing to do, and then determining how best to do it, and trusting that our people who are paid to make those decisions make the right decisions on how to do it. And I'm not saying that they all make the right decisions, and I'm not saying that that didn't contribute to our very sad withdrawal from Vietnam in the manner in which we left Vietnam.
Okay, this is politics, Russia, Ukraine, Yo. Go to candidate John. Go to John for Congress.
They were aided and abetted in that demise by people who were not American citizens. There were a lot of American citizens involved, but they were being controlled by outside influencers. And that was long before the internet. So it's magnified now, and some of that is going on right now with regard to Ukraine. So you have to take some of what you read on the internet, much of what you read on the internet in social media, with a grain of salt. Thank you, Tam. Brent, Anson, and Steve. Brent.
So just a few comments. First, kind of on Tiger's comments about kind of the building Russian momentum and continuing Russian momentum. I mean, the battlefield doesn't portray that. If you look at patrols, for example, you have several axes of advance by Russia that have been cut off, and Russians are essentially surrounded and surrendering. Ukraine's either making some progress in counterattacks now, or Russia's making very, very minimal advances. So I like Kroos is not going to fall anytime soon. I don't think any observer of the conflict thinks that.
Go to JohnForCongress.com. This is politics, yoga, Russia, Ukraine.
It's good to stay current because the summer is not right now, and right now the Russian offensive looks a lot different than earlier. I just got to note that the discussion on escalation. Russia has constantly said it's going to escalate. Attack on Turkey, we're going to be an escalation. Tanks, as previous mission, we're going to be an escalation. It's always proved hollow, and for good reason. I mean, a nuclear exchange is just as much risk for Russia as it is for us. That is a difficult place to go for a conventional war outside your borders. So I think we have to handle that with reason and also understand that waving that escalation flag doesn't mean you get a veto over any action you do. Because where does that end? Russia's been a bad actor for a long time. You can't just allow them to continue to be a bad actor because they have a nuclear weapon. Which brings me to my third point on this whole thing, and Steve, you listen to the Tucker interview, and Tucker's a good Russian stooge that likes to prop their messaging. But at the end of the day, one has to ask, why did all these countries that surround Russia, Poland, Balts, Finland, want to join NATO? Is because Russia is a really shitty neighbor, and it's been a really shitty neighbor for a long time, and providing collective security against that type of neighbor is a good thing, and providing that type of collective security against a bad actor in the world is also a good thing. Russia, I don't know what's going on in Vladimir Putin's design, but I've heard these ramblings about the 1100s, and I think you can only take self-aggrandizement and narratives of history that support your views. But so far, I mean, at some points, Russia had designs into Germany. Does that mean we should be scared if they threaten Germany? I don't think so. I think we have to stand with the people of the world that want to be free and that want to kind of resist it, which kind of finally brings me to the tomahawk discussion. You know, I think you're missing, or I think the room's kind of missing the bigger picture. Tomahawks are a means for long-range fires into Russia, or possibly into Russia. They're not the only means. Ukraine has shown great effect with drones. We are giving them extended range attack munitions. Please Google that. It's a 500 nautical mile missile that can fire that can range Russia. We're giving that to them in the coming months. If we do give Tomahawks, that's great. But what really makes a difference isn't giving them the weapon systems, it's enabling the weapon systems with intel and the sort of targeting packages that are needed. And at least recent reports suggest that we are doing that. There's an RT article that suggested that we had the first strike on a petroleum refinery and aided by U.S. intelligence, which if true, that in my opinion that would be great. But I think we're a little bit losing the forest for the trees. There might be reasons we want to not transfer Tomahawks to Russia. Those reasons probably involve like tech transfer reasons, nothing to do with escalation or really nothing to do with Russia. We just want to protect our technology. But the real question is, will this administration, unlike previous administration, which didn't up until the very end, enable strikes into Russia? And I'm hopeful that they will. And I think doing that will be a significant game changer.
So you're absolutely right that Tucker Carlson is a shill for Russia, but I don't think you are suggesting that Steve misquoted what Mr. Putin said using the Tucker Carlson platform to give his as a bullet pulpit, right?
No, I'm not.
So I don't think it really matters whether Tucker Carlson, in the context of what Steve said, is kissing the butt of Putin. Of course he is. He's such a shill for Russia. He's an embarrassment. He embarrasses himself. But as a result of that, Putin felt comfortable going on his show and saying what he said. And so I don't think it negates what Steve said by suggesting that Tucker Carlson is.
So my point is he was allowed to give an uncritical view, or he was allowed to give his view.
Right, it wasn't critically challenged, of course not.
Without any sort of challenging. And when that occurs, it's difficult to know if the speaker is just simply giving propaganda to a certain purpose, or is he a true believer like Steve suggested and believes all this kind of nationalist stuff? I'm more into camp that Putin is a smart guy and he's giving propaganda to a useful stooge.
Well, arguably he took a reduction in position when he left the KGB to become president of Russia. To your point about challenging what Tiger suggested about Russia is winning the war, I think you're absolutely right. I think that if by any objective view, it's pretty much a stalemate. Russia does control more land overall, but Ukraine has repeatedly blunted some of the Russian offenses and has achieved gains, pushed the Russians back, and obtained territory back. Russia has suffered extremely heavy losses in manpower and equipment. Now, so has Ukraine. But the point is that if we're going to do a running tally of who in the aggregate is winning this war, I think that it's sort of like a boxing match. You've got three judges, and they determine who won the round, and sometimes all three agree who won the round, but sometimes it's a 2-to-1 split decision. and then maybe a split decision at the end.
I agree with that. My point is you have to also look for momentum changes in a boxing match. I would argue that there's been a momentum change in this boxing match since the summer, where, if you rewind the tape, Russia was making slow, very incremental changes. To a large degree, that has stopped, and Ukraine has been making successful counterattacks, and in a lot of cases, trapping pockets of Russian soldiers and forcing surrenders are pretty reasonable numbers of Russians who surrender. On the point, does Russia hold more ground? It also depends where you start the march. The clock, if you go back to the beginning, go back to 2020 when this war, when the new phases of this war started. I mean, they were almost at Kyiv. Russia's been pushed back well far since then. I think they control. You have to Google me to make sure I'm right, but I think the number is around 18 or 17% of Ukrainian land right now, which isn't the majority of Ukrainian.
Yeah, I still suggest that it's a stalemate. I don't think either side can claim victory right now. Thank you, Brent. Anson and then Steve. Anson.
I'll try to be real quick. I posted, I was asked about bombing cities, bombing civilians, and I gave an answer, but I went a little more in depth in the chat. Never ignore the Russian people's capacity to endure suffering. Hitler and Napoleon forgot about that, or ignored it, or weren't aware of it, and look at the lessons that they learned. So if we decide to bomb, quote, Moscow, i.e. Civilian populations, I am pretty certain that the end result will be a dramatic escalation in national aggression. The people will demand national aggression and will not demand peace because a couple of apartment buildings got blown up. In other words, if you try to piss off the Russians, be very careful. The Russian people, be very careful, because look at the historical and I believe still current capacity for them to endure suffering far more than what this nation is capable of doing. The second point that I want to make is, first of all, Tam, Dominic, Steve, even David made, David usually, well, David and I don't always agree geopolitically, but, basically they're saying, it's time to stand up. And you used a word, and I was flashing thumbs ups to Dominic when he was starting to talk about America as a chicken. And I thought, oh, cow, that's good. But you used the word pussified, Gary. That Dominic.
No, he didn't use it. That was my word. You're exactly right.
Yeah, but in your pretty long discussion with Tam about the influence of foreign actors is the thing that's dominating, is causing people to think that America is weaker, etc. I don't agree with that. I believe that America today is an overfed, oversexed, indulgent, pussified society because of the nature of our desire to have all the things that we have, and we're not willing to fight in order to preserve that which we have as a national society, as opposed to look at what America did to unite and endure during World War II. And even the way when we do fight now is reflected in that in our military doctrine. You talked about the 1960s. Obviously, you and I were alive and well and enduring all that. And I'm not trying to refight the Vietnam War or anything like that. But in the Vietnam War, we lost 58,000 killed, men mostly, killed on the battlefield in Vietnam. In a 20-year war in Iraq and Afghanistan, how many American men and, women were killed on the battlefield during combat? Not 58,000 over 20 years. It was about 5,000 to 6,000 in both wars. Combat deaths to American military personnel. Now you can credit some of that to advanced medicine and all that kind of stuff. But that reflects the way we tried to win a war without the courage to storm the bastions of the enemy. It affects our rules of engagement in the way we have tried to fight wars since World War II. The rules of engagement that have become so stultifying for the ability of the American military to do its job to win a war. I think that, and I believe the inflection point for that happening was probably very close to the time that the Soviet Union collapsed. And very specifically, I would point out that one of the greatest detriments to the American Navy's ability to fight and train, fight, and win, the process began, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this one. The process began in 1992. You know what happened in 1992? Tailhook. Now, I am not going to forgive, I'm not going to make excuses for the sexual behavior of the American military. But the influences of tailhook have become pervasive across the United States Navy. And I'm going to a reunion in 2 weeks with a classmate of mine, a retired four-star, that led the tailhook investigation. And everything that resulted from that investigation, the sum total was to weaken the American Navy's ability to fight and win, train, fight, and win a war. And I believe that that downward trend in America is internal and caused by the nature of our society today far more than any influence that Russia, China, etc. can influence us on the internet or however. We're doing it to ourselves. We have a chance to follow the lead of Israel, and Ukraine should be the battlefield in which we reverse that trend. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to get into a long dissertation from either of us about this, but I would really like to understand better how the tail hook changed the Navy to such a point that it's ineffective. I would have hoped that it would have changed
Significantly degraded the effectiveness of the Navy. It began with tailhook alone didn't cause it. It began. That was the inflection point. If you look at how the Navy trained and operated prior to tailhook, and you look at how the Navy trained, operated today, that was the inflection point. that we started on a downhill path for social reasons. But that's a long discussion, but I'm not saying that tail hook alone caused it. I'm saying that was the inflection point that began the downhill trend in naval readiness and ability to train, fight, and win a war.
Look, you got the first-hand knowledge of this. I don't, and but I can't comprehend how that might be. We don't have time to talk about it, but I'd love for you to explain to you. Send me emails before. When you get a chance, send me an email and explain it to me, because I don't understand how fighting sexual impropriety within the ranks results in the ultimate degrading of the training of the troops. I don't get that, but you will be able to explain that to me better. By the way, to your point, Anson, about this being an over-sexualized society, I guess I've been missing out. I must not be in the in crowd of society.
I forgot all that shit about 20 years ago, Gary.
Jeez, I wanna see what I'm missing. I wanna be with the in crowd, baby.
Well,
Steve,
I know what I was like back in the 60s and 70s too, and you do too for yourself, probably.
I might. Steve, you get the last word.
Yeah, Gary, the oldest military installation in the state I live in, my great-grandfather, sixth generation removed, was the first commander. He fought in the Revolutionary War. He knew what he was fighting for. I had a great uncle that fought in D-Day, fought till he was so tired he couldn't even pull his rifle up and was shot and took it, I don't know how long to recover from it. He knew what he was fighting for. I had a son that went to Iraq that is no longer with me. I don't know what he was fighting for. I don't know what he fought for there. Someone please tell me. And now we're talking about this. We're talking about this kind of stuff here. And someone mentioned national security of the United States. You tell me what the national security of the United States is.
National interest. Maybe it's
National interest. Tell me the national interest. Tell me what it is. Tell me the national interest in Ukraine. Taiwan, they make their chips. It goes in everything. There's a national interest there. But the idea that somehow we've lost our bravery because we're not willing to spend blood on a battlefield where the United States national security interest is not at stake. Like I say, my great-grandfather, he knew what the interest was. He's in the Revolutionary War. He fought under George Washington. My great-uncle, when he laid in that mud after being shot by a German soldier, he knew what his national interest was. My son didn't know what his national interest was. He told me the contractors was over there making a ton of money and he was getting bullets shot at him. So before someone starts saying we've lost our will, maybe we haven't lost our will, maybe we haven't lost our bravery, maybe we just don't want to spill blood for some political purpose. And I'll leave it there.
So Steve, I hear what you're saying, and I empathize, as you well know, with your situation and the sacrifice your family has given as a result of all this. I get all that. But I don't know what the argument has to do with the discussion of tomahawk weapons. I have not yet heard anybody suggest that we put boots on the ground anywhere unless you're suggesting that this is a slippery slope and this is the beginning of that slope.
Well, it possibly could be. When I hear these words like national interest, we've lost our will to fight. We've lost our courage to fight. My great-grandfather didn't lose any courage. He knew why he's fighting. My great-uncle knew why he's fighting. My son's seen a bunch of contractors running around Iraq making all kind of money for Halliburton and Dick Cheney. He didn't know why he's fighting. And the idea that we're getting pulled into something, this is a European matter, and we're getting pulled into something and being told, well, you don't have the courage. Well, my son had courage. My great-grandfather had courage. But my great-grandfather had righteous courage. He didn't have misplaced courage. And people need to think about this.
I Anson, okay, there you are, Anson. Could you clarify your position and see whether it's in alignment with what Steve is saying or whether it's being misunderstood?
There are countless Americans that have the bravery to do the next right thing. There are countless Americans that are willing to spill their own blood to protect and defend this nation. What I'm trying to address, Steve, is what my perception of the national psychic is. And I'm going to use a word that Gary hates and will claim he doesn't understand. America has become far too woke. And to be able to explain that, I couldn't get it into an email, that's for sure. But this whole malaise of we are not, can you imagine, Steve, if Biden had implemented, and I've read a book where they considered implementing sanctions against Russian oil, the consequence of which would have been $6 or $7 a gallon gas in the U.S.
Yeah, I know where you're going.
And for that reason alone, they withheld that level of sanctions. And in fact, they even drew down on the strategic reserve so that Americans, the pussified American psychic, didn't have to see gas gallons going up 50 cents a gallon. And that's chicken shit politics, and that's the thing that it just really boils my guts. It's time for us, you and I can put our rifles on our shoulders and we would march off and protect and defend. And I don't denigrate that attitude, and there's a substantial amount of that. But the national psychic, Dominic called it, I loved it when he said, yeah, she was a hawk, she was a chicken hawk. Even our hawks are chicken hawks. And we've been pussified as a nation through our own indulgence. And until we figure out a way to be able to endure some suffering as a nation in order to fight and win the wars that deserve to be fought and won, then we're going to continue down on the downhill path.
I can agree with that. I can agree
with Gary for giving me the opportunity to try to have that brief discussion with my very, very good friend and man that I deeply respect, Steve. Steve and I are on the same boat, and neither one of us likes pussies.
Yeah, I'm with you, Anson. Yeah.
And that comment alone will get me in all kinds of trouble, I'm sure.
Well, thanks, Gary, for indulging us, and thank you, Anson.
Well, I wanted to clear it up because I wasn't certain that you guys were on the same wavelength on that issue, and I didn't want us to close without that being resolved. Folks, we're here Monday through Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. New York time, so until 5 p.m. New York time tomorrow. For the next edition of the Critical Thinking Forum, everybody be safe, be well, and peace out.